Burt Lancaster once looked me dead in the eye and said, "Do you suck cock?" This was 1985. I was producing an NBC miniseries in Mexico City, and he was the star. And I was in his trailer trying to convince him to do one more interview, and that's what came out of his mouth. I'm going to tell you about it in a minute, but I've just written a thriller about that whole experience. It's called Fault Lines, and while the story's fiction, a lot of what's in the book actually happened. The chaos, the danger, the personalities, and let me tell you a little bit about it. On September 19th, 1985, there was a massive earthquake in Mexico City. Buildings collapsed, just like pancakes. And the death toll was staggering. Estimates ran from between 10 and 20,000 people killed that day. And we were still in pre-production on this film that I was producing for NBC. It's called On Wings of Eagles. It was a 5-hour miniseries. But since we were all still prepping for the film, the shoot didn't shut down, but everything changed. Some local crew members lost their homes. Whole neighborhoods turned into rubble overnight. And a few weeks later, my boss, a guy named Edgar Sherrick, calls me from Los Angeles. Edgar was the executive producer, very tough, smart guy, originally from Brooklyn. He moved fast, and he just read a story in the International Herald Tribune about a woman trapped under a collapsed building for several days. May have been like 10 days, I forget, but she had been pinned under concrete after the earthquake, and she lived. But they had to amputate both of her legs to get her out. Well, after reading this story, Edgar had gone straight to CBS and he'd sold it as a movie of the week. And now he wanted me to find this woman, track her down, get her to sell her rights and sign a contract. So I did with Marta, who was one of our production assistants for translating. She found her in a hospital and we went down there to see her. And as I recall, it was a very dim room one afternoon, and the bed sheets on her hospital bed, they lay flat where her legs should have been. She was maybe close to 40. And we spoke quietly. I told her that a network in the US wanted to buy her life story and make it into a movie. She was emotional, obviously in an incredibly difficult time. So we chatted a bit and I left the contracts. The contracts were in English and Spanish, as well as the name of a Mexican law firm that she could consult to help her understand what she was signing if she agreed. That law firm costs would be covered by CBS. So we ended up buying her life rights for $10,000, but CBS never made the movie. And I just have to say, I felt like an ambulance chaser through that whole thing, going to see someone, in the hospital who'd had this huge tragedy and then trying to buy her story. But, that was the job. Okay, the Lancaster moment. Now, Burt Lancaster, let me tell you, he hated interviews. He had agreed when he'd been hired to do this. It was an NBC miniseries. He'd agreed to do one interview for the Today Show. That's because NBC insisted, since they wanted to promote the miniseries on their network, and that was their show Today. So they came down and shot that, and that was great. But beyond that, Lancaster's agent had made it clear that he had zero interest in doing any interview with whether it's with American or the Mexican press, just nothing. Now, there were some rumors about Lancaster, and on the set, some people whispered about it. Was he straight? Was he gay? And he brought along this middle-aged guy, very flamboyant and pretty obviously gay, as his dialogue coach. So they would run lines together every night in Lancaster's suite. And a number of big stars who weren't married, like Lancaster wasn't married at this time, they would bring along a cute, 20-something-year-old girl to run lines. But Lancaster, he'd brought along a middle-aged gay guy to work with him for the 3 months that he was doing the filming. Then Lancaster's actual girlfriend showed up for a few days, a woman in her 30s, and sort of nobody knew what to think. Crews gossip, that's what they do. So then one day, an executive at Taft Entertainment, this is the studio that was paying for the film, calls me and says, hey, there's a major interview opportunity. Maybe it was like 60 Minutes or something really high level. I don't recall exactly, but this big show wanted Lancaster on if he was willing to go on. Now, Lancaster's agent had already said no, but apparently they thought Lancaster liked me. So this executive said, hey, ask Burt if he'll do this 60 Minutes appearance or whatever it was, see what he says. So I pretty much knew that he'd say no, but the next day I was in his trailer. We're going through the schedule or something, and I bring it up, kind of casually. Hey, there's an offer for you to do 60 Minutes. Would you be interested? And he doesn't even pause. He just says, no interviews. I say, oh, okay, fine, no problem. Then he leans forward and he says, because all they want to ask me is one thing. Do you suck cock? And I just kind of stared at him like, what the heck did he just say? And then he says, do you think I suck cock? And I said the only thing I could think of, which is, I've never even thought about it. And then he kind of grinned and he said, see, you could interview me, but not those other cocksuckers. So then I changed the subject, back to the call sheet for the next day or, something, whatever it was. But I will never forget that moment that Burt Lancaster telling me that the press wanted to know the only thing, whether he sucked cock.
Do you suck cock?
Okay, one more recollection from that shoot. We needed military cooperation in order to shoot. We needed trucks and tanks and soldiers and access to place. And one of our local producers had a connection, a former president of Mexico, and the ex-president's daughter wanted to act. She was in telenovelas, so we gave her a small part in the miniseries, like maybe she was a flight attendant, I think. And suddenly a lot of doors opened as a result of that. Near the end of the shoot then, the former president threw us a party at his mansion. And it was in this incredible neighborhood with huge houses. And he basically lived in a compound that had 12-foot walls around it. There were armed soldiers standing on top of them with automatic weapons, machine guns. There were guards at the gate checking credentials. Once you went inside, it was gorgeous. Beautiful house, pool, food, music, and men with machine guns watching you eat guacamole. This was Mexico in the 1980s. None of this spoils what's in my book, but it gives you a sense of what went into Fault Lines. There was danger, politics, absurdity, and people, the characters like Lancaster that I met along the way. The book is out now. The link to the book is below. I hope you check it out. Thanks for watching.